Hello and welcome to episode 70 of the Foundry Roundtable, the podcast exclusively covering the Foundry for Star Trek Online. I'm your tame Foundry author, Dragoon1701. With me is a man who won't admit that he's responsible for the Icelandic volcano eruption, despite ample evidence, Greendragoon.
You can't prove it. Nobody can prove it.
You see what I mean? Total denial.
I deny nothing and everything.
No, you don't. And we have a man who took the Ice Bucket Challenge this week, only his was filled with Romulan ale, Markhawkman.
Yeah, that didn't last very long.
And our guest tonight, one of an honorable race of fish people, HippieJohn.
Glob, glob. Glob, glob, glob.
Hippie, of course, is our...
I'm sorry, I had forgotten to turn on my universal translator. Hi, everybody.
That's better. That's better. Hippie is, of course, our recently departed co-host, but we're more than happy to have him back as a guest, especially when he is still foundrying.
I am still foundrying. I am still making things.
So, let's do the news. And the big news this week is a massive patch has hit Tribble. The server itself is down for the moment. Can't play on it, but the explanation in this seems like a no-brainer. But I would expect that this is the code branch update that was talked about, which is preparing the way for Delta Rising testing. Not sure if I would expect it to be up this week to start testing. A tweet was sent out by the Cryptic Emergency QA hologram on Twitter that it would be a few days at least. So, in the meantime, as per usual, Redshirt is up with short-term patches. The latest one, which is also going right to holodeck tomorrow, as we find out, has a fix that I really hope fixes my issues with DOF missions that are stuck on finishing. But other than that, no Foundry updates. We'll also all be, of course, waiting patiently to see what, if anything, new makes it into the Foundry. New ships, new costumes, new doors, I hope, maybe in the Delta Quadrant. However the Delta Quadrant is going to work, we don't even know that. So,
New accidental features.
Yeah. New leaks.
Hey, one can hope.
Like an actual OComp and race option in the Taylor in the Foundry, maybe, possibly. I don't know.
Well, we've got the years, don't we?
We've got the years.
We've always had the years.
Well, what else do we need?
Well, it was just kind of a joke, really. But it was actually a reference to how, at one point in time, on Tribble at least, we had the ability to make Suliban characters in the editor. Or was that just the alien player character?
Yeah, that was the alien player character. There was some weirdness when they first brought Legacy of Romulus up. Like you could even make people in the Enterprise Mako uniform somehow. I never figured out how you could do that.
In the Enterprise Mako uniform.
That would be funny. But there's really all we can do is speculate at this point. But I'm sure I would be betting that next week for sure that we're going to be able to test some stuff.
Yeah, and at the very least, it's the first chance to kind of see if anything breaks.
You can bet it will. That's just going on past experience. You can bet it will. So
the question is not whether something will break, but
it's
what
will break.
And how bad.
Yeah. Which I really hope everyone gets on Tribble and does plenty of testing of the Foundry. So maybe we can catch these things and maybe they can at least get to work on them even if they don't fix them by launch.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're going to be busy.
Oh, yeah.
Getting it sooner is always better.
Mm-hmm. So we do have another piece of Foundry news this week, which is the Foundry got a shout-out on an MMORPG.com article, which named it as the third best UGC system for MMOs. The article said the Foundry can make missions that rival what the devs can make, but that it can have a steep learning curve, with which are both statements that I agree with. First place was the Neverwinter Foundry. We've all talked about that one many a time.
Honestly, I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
I think we're the Neverwinter world, the sort of world where, so the biggest negative I have, I can't do, and I've heard other people say this, like Kirkvat says this too, that you can't do like on-map dialogues and you can't do pop-ups and stuff. Okay, so that is really tough. But it makes sense in a fantasy world. The only way that a pop-up dialogue out of the middle of nowhere would make sense is maybe like a telepathy or something like that.
Yeah, a wizard did it.
Yeah, some fantasy settings, it's actually relatively common to use forms of magic for communication over distances.
Yeah, so, I mean, it would be nice to have it, but I can understand the lack of it, and really, a lot of the other things are very powerful in that tool. So.
You heard it here, folks. Our Foundry is superior.
Well, I think our user interface is superior, personally, to what's over on Neverwinter, but they do have a lot more toys than we do.
Actually, there was someone in the comments who was making an argument for why Stowe's Foundry should be in first place. It was mostly based on the merits of the content coming out of the Foundry.
Yeah, I think by and large, I mean, I've played some fairly brilliant missions over there, but I think on the whole, we do a lot better.
And I think a lot of it just has to...
I am kind of biased.
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're working in an IP that is very much story-centric. And that's not to say that D&D isn't story-centric, but it's a different level.
At its heart, it's a storytelling game, but there's a big part of it that depends on things like how much experience do you get, and where are you standing in the battle, and it's a battle game too. I mean, originally Chainmail was a tabletop battle game, so.
Well, I believe that Captain Kirk would argue that Star Trek is also. I wouldn't say centered on combat, but combat takes front stage often.
It's an action show for sure. I think Star Trek in general is an action-oriented... I
don't know, I'd say it has a healthy mix.
It always has been.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, my point I was trying to make, though, was that Star Trek has a history of very deep storytelling. I mean, digging into the very deeper essences of characters and philosophical ideas.
Oh, yeah. Well, and we've said it before, I think, but in the best action stories, the action serves the story and not the other way around.
Exactly.
We're not dealing with the Expendables here.
For example, the legendary fight between Kirk and the Gorn captain.
Oh,
there is a specific reason why he was fighting the Gorn captain. It wasn't just a random bar brawl.
Right, there was... Mm-hmm.
For that you need Firefly. I joke, of course, because that is actually it's more like a character setup in Firefly.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the bar fight that occurs in the second episode, and I'm like, that bar fight is one of the most character-centric moments.
Mm-hmm. It completely sets up the Malcolm Reynolds character. That's all you need to know about him is in that scene.
That is, I see in our chat room, Negus is right. It is really hard to call Trek an action show with some episodes that do have zero action in it at all. But I think that at least my feeling on that is it's not strictly an action show. I think at its heart, it really is a story, a show that takes a chance to tell a lot of different stories about the human condition. And some of that involves action. And when they did it, sometimes they did it well, sometimes they did it poorly. So.
And sometimes you got epic battles in Deep Space Nine.
Uh-huh.
Star Trek is big enough to...
It was a new thing for Star Trek, though.
Yeah.
To have an actual full-scale war.
But, I mean, I think it just goes to show that Star Trek is actually so much bigger than the box we sometimes put it into.
Oh, yeah. It's never just one thing. But let's see. The other ones on the list here. Second place was the mission architect from the late and lamented City of Heroes. I've not actually played that one, but I kind of hear it's similar to the Foundry.
It was. I got to toy with it for like a week before City of Heroes shut down. I had not really been a big City of Heroes player, so
I'd never played it, so.
I only really had just started playing it and discovered the mission architect, and then they were like, "Oh, we're shutting down," and I'm like, "I am not going to explore this any farther."
I would bet that some people in our listeners have played it, so maybe they can tell us a little bit about what it's like. Because actually, I read a different article this week that said a group of players might be trying to buy the rights to City of Heroes, so who knows, it could come back.
It could.
I think it's very, very early in the stages of that, but
yeah, I mean, since that game disappeared, people have been trying to make it come back spiritually with design teams or finding someone to buy it.
It was a very loved game.
Yeah,
I think any game can be that way. But yeah,
and oddly, it was still profitable as far as I know from the things that I've read. So it was a very strange decision to shut it down.
Yeah, I've heard some conflicting information on that, so I'm not entirely sure what to believe.
It's gone. It's sad.
One of my personal favorite games is actually abandonware, but people are still playing it, even however many years it's been since the developer officially ceased support. Why? Because he made it so that you could modify the game relatively easily, and it was fun.
So you have teased it? Great. What game, man?
Space Empires 5.
Yep.
I thought so.
The first MMO
Mark's very big into.
First MMO I ever played was Mist Online, which had a really rocky history. It got shut down like 2 or 3 times. And then when it finally got shut down by the last publisher who had it, the developers actually labored to get it released as open source, just so that the community could run it and make changes to it and kind of keep the game alive.
Well, it's something that we've covered before, but it seems like if you have a UGC system, it's like the perfect retirement plan for an MMO. Because you can just, if you have that, people can just continually make content for your game. You can just put it in maintenance mode, have enough people to keep the lights on, essentially, and do server maintenance, and that's it.
Well, it's a funny thing, because this game actually had an in-fiction reason for all of these modders called the Guild of Writers. And because I don't know if anyone's ever played Myst, but one of the premises behind it is that people can write these books that link to worlds. And so creating these new worlds was basically called writing these ages. And so there was this whole guild devoted specifically to designing new worlds for this game. Sort of UGC, but cool. Very unofficially.
Well, so that's actually very similar to the approach with Space Empires 5, because the developer realized after, making 2, 3, and 4, that players really, really loved the idea of being able to, I guess you could say, write their own expansions for the game, which is something that I've spent a lot of time working on, and it's a whole lot of fun. Even though the basic gameplay is rather simple. I mean, it's, a 4X game where, you have planets, you build ships, and you conquer the universe. It's still fun, even after all these years, because you can, change it.
You can change it up, yeah.
Absolutely. So let's see, the other two that were in the top 5 below the Star Trek Online Foundry was EverQuest 2 Dungeon Maker, which I haven't seen that one. I did play EverQuest 2 for a little while with one of my old Stow guilds, but they had just introduced it and it was subscriber only, so I didn't get to see it.
Yeah,
I think it's fairly basic, just making dungeon crawls, which can be fun, for sure. And in 5th place was Second Life, which, as I understand it, is almost entirely user-generated content.
It pretty much is. I have seen Second Life because I have a friend who does stuff there, and I saw it on his computer. But really, it's an entire world full of things that people have created. So,
as I understand it, it's almost not a game. It's more just a world that is there for people to interact with and
social
be and
interaction,
socialize, and things like that.
Yep.
So, actually, as we're talking about UGC systems and other games, I wanted to mention one because I bet you Hippie would like this.
Which one?
It is a new one that was just announced. It's by BioWare. It's called Shadow Realms, which they're calling it a 4 versus 1 game, where essentially, and I think it's going to be like horror genre, but essentially one person plays essentially a dungeon master, and 4 people play adventurers, and they go through this dungeon, and the one person who's the dungeon master essentially invents traps and things and throws stuff at them to try and kill them, and they try and get to the end of the dungeon. Not a lot of details on it yet. They just announced it. But it sounds kind of fun, and it sounds, sort of randomized and almost UGC-like, because you got one player sort of creating the environment a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And shaping the gameplay, you might say. Seems kind of fun. I might have to check that out.
Okay, sounds
but
like
I know you're a fan
fun checking out. Yeah.
I know you're a fan of tabletop games, which is and being a dungeon master is a little bit like that, right?
Yes, very much so.
Inventing new and interesting ways to try and kill everybody.
So I will say that one of my favorite, you can call it UGC systems of all time, was way back when, before Cryptic did Neverwinter, when BioWare did Neverwinter Nights. Neverwinter Nights 2 was a prettier game. It just never got the same kind of community. But the first one, it was a really fairly dynamic system that you could go in as a creator, and you could write the entire story, and you could script it, and you could, you could design the dungeons and the bars, everything that people, the taverns that people hung out in, and you had some control over dialogue choices and things like that. So it was, but the only way to share the missions was a bulletin board system that the game officially supported, which was nice. The game actually, officially had a way to use that bulletin board right in it, so.
Now, as I recall, you could do some multiplayer in that, like in teams of something, teams of 4?
Teams of up to 4. So
yeah.
What some friends and a cousin of mine from back east, when I was, living out here, used to do with it was, and out here, by that I mean Colorado, so it's pretty far from the east, is that I would create missions, and then 4 of them would log on, together, and they would play them, and then we would all, chat afterwards and stuff, so.
Very cool. So let's see, the last piece of news that I have is, and I'm not up on my Japanese pronunciation, so I will probably butcher this, but Kaganisai has closed his poll on the top 5, or the top 5 requested functions or utilities for the Foundry. So the number 1 is options to specify away team size for ground maps. Certainly, no one would say no to that. Next one is trigger toggles, which is essentially adding things like or to logic states instead of just and, triggers that can have different effects after each usage, things of that nature. So essentially, you turn force field on and off. I think you can do that in Neverwinter.
With trigger toggles, this is one of those things where you would have a console and a force field, and then you push the button on the console to make the force field go down. But currently, it's a one-way thing. With a toggle, you can push the button again to make the force field come back up, and do that endlessly. Which, as far as I know, is something that is actually a function in Neverwinter. It's just not
that I know of. I'm pretty sure it's still.
I know there's at least there's some objects that you can hit multiple times, like locks or something like that, or levers.
Yeah, but those aren't triggers. Or like locked doors and stuff, and teleporters are bidirectional. and can be used.
Funny you should
times.
say teleporters, because that's number 4 on the list. Number 3 was to designate areas or whole maps as lethal without EV suits. I would definitely like that.
Yeah, but how do you keep that from being abused, though?
That one's
Warn
hard.
the player a lot.
You just say too bad.
You
So
could,
sad.
but then theoretically
You can always baby the player.
player could
also there.
work into a situation where they
'cause
can't escape.
Even the cryptic maps that allegedly require the use of EV suits. You may have heard the Foundry whining when they made the Nukara maps a PvE QE thing, where people would often show up not knowing that an EV suit was required. And let's face it, that happened in cryptic stuff, so it's going to happen in Foundry stuff too.
Yeah, but there's time when you beam onto a place that requires an EV suit. There is time to beam back up. It doesn't kill you instantly.
So maybe like have a built-in.
Yeah.
Okay, I could see that being
Because it slowly
Doable.
takes down your health. It's not an instant.
It could be it could simply be an environmental volume.
I think that might be one of the best ways to do it.
It just make it a volume that you put on the map, and it makes the map
Like
require an
the,
EV suit.
Like the low gravity one.
yeah.
Let's see. Number 5 on the list of this was the fully customizable mob parameters. Essentially, choosing which abilities, choosing what hull points they have, shield points, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I
It's
think
definitely
that one's
something that
wishful
people want.
thinking, but
Yeah,
whatever.
I don't see that one happening.
I don't see it happening. It's a lot of really good ideas.
Well, and with the other polls that I did, I mean, these are all just suggestions.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody should have any expectation that because these got high in the poll that they will be done.
Yeah.
These are just the players are running this so that at least we can give a general idea to the devs that, hey, this is what we want.
No, something I'd love to take on as maybe a topic on another show is kind of looking at really small things that don't really use any new tech but could give us new functionality. Because I mean, things
We'll
like
have to-
maybe a few mob grade bosses or a
Yeah,
or
Bosses was another one on that list, and it was down a little ways, but it's definitely on that list.
because I could see something like that being much more likely than being a full customizability over mobs.
Because we know those boss mobs are already in the game.
Right.
Yeah.
They're all over the place. We just need them and dreadnoughts as well. Right now we can get dreadnoughts to spawn from battleship. What would you call it? Battleship mobs. If you have like a team of, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4, you get a dreadnought to spawn. But it'd be nice to have something that spawns a dreadnought every time.
Yeah,
Just
or
one. I
only
don't
one.
need more than one.
One, and maybe
Or with the
it just
Voth.
scales in difficulty.
Or with the Voth to have to redo those mobs a little bit to separate out the dinosaurs and the mechs, so that we know
Oh.
which ones are going to spawn.
And we know
So I can finally make my Jurassic Park parody.
we know that in some way they can do that too, because they took the old True Way mobs and split them into Jem'Hadar and Cardassian.
Absolutely.
Oh well, they just created 2 new factions, and
Yeah,
probably
I'm
ones that
sure.
already existed for them.
And they could create new factions that would be purely for this. The Voth humanoids, Voth dinosaurs, Voth mechs. Split them into 3 factions. Do it
Yeah,
that
I
way.
think the only trick there would just be narrowing down what is it we're actually looking for versus just saying everything.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty much what my idea behind starting those polls was, and probably the idea behind the original one that Primar did, is our requests are like a shotgun, over a mile range, that hits nothing. So you need a nice big sniper rifle, something targeted and focused in your feedback.
And I think it really does make a difference, because rather than like 10 or 11 pages full of a bunch of different people saying, I want this, you get 5 items that everyone voted on, or 10 or 20, whatever they say that they can do. And it's happening now, So they'll let us know what kind of things are possible.
We've seen good things come of it.
So out of curiosity, you guys' top 3 picks for features you'd like to see added to the Foundry.
Well, I would say, actually, 2 of mine are not in the Foundry itself, but more on the UI side of things in game, like follow author and campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think those would be very useful. And then I'd like teleporters. Teleporters would be fantastic.
Oh, yeah, very good. I mean, it's one of the things that we hear people asking about the most often because of the fact that it's a feature that you see in cryptic maps rather often.
Not to mention it's Star Trek.
Yeah. Not to mention it's
We need transporters, like working ones.
My top 3 would be transporters, and I hadn't even realized that the argument for it in my brain is exactly what you just said. It's Star Trek. That one I would really like. I would like either the additional mob on top of what we already have, as far as like having dreadnought level mobs, or being able to place a Dahar master or something on the map. And the third one would be a UI thing, which is the rework of the UI to separate story heavy and combat heavy missions.
Mark, did you say what you wanted?
Well, my biggest requests were things that already got mentioned. The whole thing with being able to do the teleporter thing, because there are just so many different things you can do that with in stories. And like already got mentioned, the I forget what it was. Crap. It was one of the first things we talked about.
Now, I say one of the I should mention that in this poll, the gentleman who did it, he purposely left out a revamp of the UI system and the next button because he was focused on things for the editor itself. So that's why that's not in there.
So I will say my 3 picks are the ability to control the animation, the spawn despawn animation.
Oh yeah, that's one I would like to.
Yeah.
I would love music, the ability to set music, and I would love items or MacGuffins or whatever they're called.
I didn't realize that the UI had been specifically left out of the poll or whatever.
From that poll, yeah.
Yeah, so in my case, then, the third one would be exactly the third one you just named. Having MacGuffins that you
quest
can pick
items,
up.
yeah.
Yeah, quest items during a mission that are needed later on that you could carry from map to map. It'd be great.
Honestly, I mean, I don't pretend to know how long any of these things would take.
No,
Right.
no idea.
Unfortunately, we don't have I mean, we kind of have ideas about things like assets and maps from what Takafang has told us. And obviously, Zero can work through costumes fairly quickly, judging by the sheer amount of she managed to get in.
Speaking of Taco Fangs and him, telling us behind the scenes things on the forums, he mentioned the other day in a discussion about ship interiors that actually all of like the Federation ship interiors, they're all on the same map.
I know. That
essentially
surprised me.
Switching interiors essentially just switches you to a different spawn point.
So I kind of understand why they built that originally. I mean, I really had to think about this for a long time. But I think what happened was when they originally started these ship interiors, when the game launched, all you had was the bridge. So you had a dozen or so different bridges. And then around Season 1, they had ship interiors. So apparently they created a new map that the bridge is linked to, and then they put the 3 different kinds of ship interiors on one map. And I guess since then they've just been tacking onto it.
Yeah, just been adding to that same map. So like the new Intrepid interior will be on that map.
My answer is just give us that big giant map.
Yeah,
that's what I said. But
if
then
we want to do bottle shows, I mean, gosh.
I would be absolutely happy to have that map. But then he said, so what happens if we add another interior to it? Do we just overwrite that map? That would break a lot of missions. And I said, well, you could do a new copy every time you do that. He didn't like,
then when you
that
have
idea.
that gets messy
But
really quick.
I would be happy to have any iteration of that map, even if they never put a new version in at all.
So hey Taco, if you ever listen to this show, my response to that would be, we have 2 versions of Earth Space Stock. We have only the old version still of Quonos. I'd be totally okay exactly with any iteration of that map. It would allow us to do bottle shows.
Yeah.
Actually, don't we have the TOS bridge interior?
We do.
We do have that, because I think that was made separate.
We have 1 or 2 of the bridges in the editor.
Well, bridges are a different thing entirely, I think, and I'm not sure if those might be separate.
He said each of those are on their own map.
Yeah, which is why that was very easy because we got a big load of bridges sometime around after the Bortascu was introduced, sometime after that, because we got that bridge.
Yeah.
There's a ton of bridges that are on there.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, I can't help but think that at some point they're going to start hitting the upper limits of how much they want to cram onto a single map.
Yeah, it's got to be a huge map by now, because this would be, the 4th interior that they're adding to it, if they put the Intrepid on it.
Well, they're going to have to revamp the system. I mean, they're building off of an old system that was introduced in, Season 1?
Something like that.
So
we didn't start out with ship interiors.
No.
They may be approaching it.
It's getting strained to its limit.
Yeah, they may be approaching it totally differently.
What could help?
So,
I mean,
Taco, if you're listening, we would be happy with any iteration of that interior, although if, by some chance we could get one with the Intrepid interior, because it's awesome, that would be cool.
Yeah.
At least the screenshots we've seen are awesome.
What was it? We were talking a while back about the map from the tutorial, the first map from the tutorial.
Because that has like 5 different things on it.
Yeah. I think it would be a little bit tricky to work with, because they're not all like on the same plane. And there are probably a couple of objects that could stand to be removed.
I don't know. We're smart people. We can figure it out. I mean, we figured out the Y values. We figured out Vulcan, which, the 0 is at the top of the stairs. Figured out...
we figured out 4028.
Facility 4028.
We'll figure it out.
But
that one is kind of messed up.
Yeah, I mean, even if he pulls out a couple of objects that are in there, we could get Origin interiors, we could get the Shuttlecraft interior, we could get Starfleet Academy. That's all that's coming
let's
off.
see, there's a Klingon
the shuttle
bridge
bay.
on that one.
The shuttle bay.
Right?
There
shuttle
is a
bay.
Klingon. There's a small Klingon bridge, which I eventually found.
But I mean, we could do it's like 5 maps in one.
Yeah.
Or more. So, I mean, personally, that's what I would do. But we know that adding maps is a lot more effort than adding objects, and I think one of Taco's things right now is adding objects, which we're absolutely grateful for. And I know he's got some that he's working on now.
Well, I mean, here's the thought for you. I mean, would adding pieces of interiors, like more walls and stuff like that, be a more efficient use of time than trying to get the maps themselves in?
I don't think so.
Possibly.
Because
I don't know. It's hard to say how modular that is and how hard it is to slice up a wall into pieces.
Also, there's there's certain aspects of base maps that I would never expect to be ever available in an adequately modular form to justify not adding new base maps in the future. I mean, like elaborate floor geometry, like the room we're standing in. I really don't expect them to ever give us the ability to replicate this room layout in the Foundry. Maybe make something vaguely similar, sure, but this exact layout, it's just too complicated, in my opinion.
It'd certainly be
for
nice
me to
if
ever
we
expect them to give us the ability to make it.
had some of the pieces in it, right?
So the thing I'm thinking is that chopping it up would not be in a more efficient use of time. only because of object limits in the Foundry. If you bring it out in pieces, then they become objects that will start taking up people's object limits. If you bring it out
do you
as
mean
a map,
more like a whole corridor rather than a set of walls that you can make a corridor out of? Is that where you're getting it?
I'm thinking like a corridor would be a map. You know, if you what I'm saying is that, like, just pulling out a wall and, like, you know, the pieces or whatever, like, if you look around this room, if you were just using the pieces, you know, you've probably got 1, 2, you know, like, there's probably 100 or more just in this room, and we have a 500 object limit. You know what I mean? So if all we're pulling out of the map is objects like walls and new pieces of floor, in order so that we can try to replicate it, we're going to be needing to replicate use so many of our objects just in replicating a base map.
Well, in the vein of what Hippie's talking about, I just did a quick estimation of the number of segments of pipe in this room.
Yeah. It's like...
Yes, the pipe alone. Yeah.
And that's, I mean, to my mind, I was saying this room would require 100 plus objects
and I don't
to
make
create.
my rooms this complicated or this big usually, and that's the exact reason why.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we move it along to what we've been working on? And why don't we start with Hippie, because I know he's definitely been working on stuff.
Yes, I have. I needed to find a way to get inspired about Miranda Mayhem again, and so in game, I just simply changed her character up, and I was like, oh, so this is season 2, and I was like, how do I get there? And so the character that I have that I can play is completely different now and wears different things, and I realized that the best way for me to get inspired about writing Miranda and the Mayhems again was to write about someone totally different that has a connection. So I've been working on a mission called Lucky Lucy, The Adventures of Lucky Lucy and the Latinum Lady. Lucky Lucy is Agent Lucy. She is a Ferengi who works for Starfleet Intelligence, and the Latinum Lady is her ship. I'll say no more until I'm much farther into the process of working on it, but that's the thing I've been in addition to getting into the Foundry and playing like crazy with the new costumes. It's been the biggest toy box in the universe. I made fish people. I made bug people. It's so much fun now. So
I've seen some of your creations, and you definitely are making some good stuff. Especially those bug people. I never would have thought, because I'm wearing the armor that you used, which is the Undine armor from the Lobi store, and then you went and played with the sliders and made like something really cool out of it.
I made it really. I just put it over an alien because I was like, aliens have the largest variety of, height and difference in their sliders.
The sliders go the longest. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just went like for a bug. I like thinking bug. I was thinking really thin and creepy, and it turned out pretty thin and creepy. I liked it. So yeah, that's what I've been doing, is playing around with the costume editor a lot and working on the adventures of Agent Lucy. So to say what to say what it is or I'll just talk about genre, and sometimes the difficulty of that genre is the spy genre. And I'd like to talk about that later, like the spy or espionage genre, and a little bit of like, what kind of tactics people take toward writing that kind of thing. So that's what's, current for me.
Excellent. Mark, what have you been working on?
I think we actually lost Mark.
Oh. Okay. It's like he dropped and went offline here. Okay, well, we'll see if we get him back. Otherwise, He did say he had an internet outage earlier, so maybe he had another one. So let's move to Dragoon while we wait for him to come back. What have you been working on?
Well, I have actually been working a lot on costumes as well. In fact, I brought a picture of some of the costumes I've been working on. One is a recreation I did of the emergency medical hologram from the tutorial. Updated his uniform for 2409. We kind of tried to keep some of the kid stuff that he wore in the original tutorial. Also, the other one is a picture of one of my characters in combat armor. This is kind of one of a low-level security officer that you meet. I thought about putting him in the Mako armor, but considering this is like a low-level character, I think she's ranked as an ensign. It seemed kind of weird to have an ensign running around in Mako armor. So
yeah, it seems like, you know, even if you have Makos on your ship, you'd still have your regular security guys.
Yeah. So
Makos
this is one of those
a specialized tool.
One of those lower deck characters that you get to meet because all of your more important characters are in trouble. Other than that, I actually went to GenCon last weekend on Saturday, and I got to do something really fun. I got to meet Christine Thompson, lead writer for Star Trek Online, and her husband, Cryptic Frost, which was insanely fun.
Very cool. And you also got a Legacy of a Delta Rising T-shirt, which I'm insanely jealous of.
I did. Of course, I was more or less.
They were begging for it.
I was begging for it online. It's like, oh, I can't wait to meet you, and hopefully you get a shirt.
Buttering her up pretty good. I should say at the Meet the Devs event at the iBar in Star Trek Las Vegas, where a whole bunch of us were, they were giving them out. They held a drawing to give out Legacy Romulus shirts, I keep saying that, Delta Rising shirts, and Bazag and Zorbane did win them, but none of the rest of us.
Yeah, well, she had a bunch that she was carrying around in her bag for people that happened to find her. It's funny because she was doing this panel, and it's late at night. It's like 8 in the evening. And she's doing this writers panel, and so we're kind of all standing in line waiting to go in, and there's like maybe a half dozen of us waiting around, and so she's standing over there, and of course I didn't know what she would look like, so she kind of pipes up and says, "Are you Dragoon?" It's like, "Yeah." It's like, "Oh, I've got a shirt for you."
Awesome.
So yeah, she actually recognized me because I was wearing my Foundry Roundtable shirt.
Oh, nice.
Yay!
So tell us about the panel a little bit, her panel.
So it was actually on alternative forms of storytelling, and it had her as well as a number of other writers, specifically writers who did a lot of things like choose your own adventures or RPGs or that sort of thing. And so it was talking a lot of writing in situations where you don't have all of the elements set in stone, and kind of writing with variables and stuff like that, as also well as kind of the exploration of unintentional storytelling, and basically the idea of story elements created by the character or story introduced by the character versus being written by the author. And of course, I mean, Christine brought this back a lot to kind of her challenges of writing for player characters who are completely unknown quantities and challenges there. But she also actually brought up the Foundry. That sounds familiar. Yeah, well, she brought up the Foundry actually quite a few times as kind of an example of that unintentional storytelling or story brought to the brought by the character. And I think a lot of it came out of just that how the player can bring, I mean, just the sheer creativity of all the players can bring so much more than the author ever could. It was definitely a lot of fun. I mean, it's definitely, I could kind of relate to her a lot. I mean, especially when kind of chiming in on the issues of trying to write for an unknown Cool thing is that we got to chat a little while after the panel. It was just myself, my brother, and one other gentleman who played the game, who had come to see. But I mean, it was definitely just a lot of fun. She's very excited about Delta Rising. She obviously did not give any spoilers.
Oh, of course not.
But she's very excited. She had commented that she knows that there's a lot of people concerns from the player and whatnot, but to not worry that things are ticking, we just have to wait and see. I really enjoyed getting to talk to Cryptic Frost as well. He's a very nice, easygoing guy.
He's somebody that we interact with a lot over the forums.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, he definitely is very appreciative of all the effort that the community puts into getting bugs reported and whatnot. I mean, he was talking about the fact that at Cryptic they only have 6 people, whereas if you take like a game like or a company like Blizzard, their entire QA department is like bigger than STOA's entire team, and so still kind of has to make do with much smaller people, and so there's literally no way that they can get through and test every aspect of the game. So in a way, he relies heavily a lot on our input to get those bugs reported and to get everything tested. There just really is no other way that they could even just get those bugs cataloged. So I mean, it was very appreciative of all of what the community brings in and the efforts they put into getting bugs reported and whatnot.
Well, I feel good about encouraging everybody to go on Tribble when Legacy. Why did I keep saying that? Delta Rising hits, and test the Foundry and report anything and everything.
Yeah, but I definitely thanked him for all of the communication and whatnot he's done as far as letting us know that bugs are reported and getting us the heads up when a fix is incoming and stuff like that.
It's really enlightening to hear something like their entire bug smashing team is 6 people. So
well, that's just the QA team. It's more of the bug finding team.
The bug finding team. It's like, so, things like that are really enlightening.
Well, I mean, the entire team is only 50 people, so I mean, it's proportional to their size, but yeah, it's not a lot of people.
All right.
There was one other thing I almost forgot to mention. Kestrel did let out that the next issue of Star Trek magazine will have another short story in it. This one is actually Klingon themed and will revolve around Korin.
Guess who's buying the next issue of Star Trek magazine?
We know how much you like Korin.
Apparently, there's also going to be a big feature in that issue about Delta Rising.
Cool.
Intriguing. So, should ask one more question before moving on to you, Dragoon, is where are you on part 2?
With more up-to-date costumes, but still a lot of text to clean up.
Fair enough. All right. Let's see. I have been also working mostly on costumes. I actually tried to do a little interior work on my exploration mission over the weekend, but that invisible object bug on the 2D map is really killer. So I may have to wait a little bit till that's done. But got a lot of costume work done, especially there is so much more variety possible for civilians now than there was. We got the con uniforms, we got the Rise of Beachcombers, we got just all kinds of more options for that. So I've been going through on a lot of my missions that had heavy levels of civilian costumes and going through and changing those. I've also got one that's takes place in the Romulan Senate. I built the Romulan Senate set just, like 3 years ago, and just had a bunch of Romulans sitting there in their regular uniforms. So now I can put them in Senate uniforms, the Senate robes, and that is just going to be fantastic. Maybe one day I'll actually get that mission put back up. And of course, catching more things that need the Odyssey uniform and all kinds of stuff like that.
which Thomas's guide is so helpful.
Oh yeah. I've been going just straight off that guide, except for one thing that I had to create myself, which was, like starship design guys at the Utopia Planitia shipyards. Figured they might have a slightly different uniform, so I kind of modeled it off of the medical uniform, kind of the one that you did for your medical hologram. And then changed a few of the colors and added pockets, because I figured they would have pockets from the TAC uniform. So, yeah, lots of costume work. It's just so awesome.
Yeah.
I'm excited particularly for Romulan Republic uniforms, because I've got a couple of Romulan missions in the works. There's some issues with the TOS Romulan uniforms that I haven't been able to figure out yet. The top and bottom color palettes don't match. They turn out differently. Well, it's the same color palette, but they look different when you use them. Like one's shiny and one's not, and it changes the tint almost of each color. So I don't know. I don't like it, but I may have to work around it, because I got my mission that takes place in the past in the holodeck and needs those uniforms. So
I have a question. I have a question for you, real quick. Is it the same color, or is it you're getting the same palette to use for both?
You get the same palette, but when you select the same color, they do not match.
Then that's not the problem that they had on holodeck when they first came out. I was just wondering if it was something similar.
Yeah, I remember they had different problems then. I can't remember what they were.
They had different palettes.
Yeah, that's right. So there are a few issues, and I know there's a big thread on the forums that has cataloged these issues. I don't know if we'll get any of them fixed, but here's hoping. So let's see. Mark is still offline. He went offline in game too, so I think he must be having another internet outage. So let's move on to mission reviews, because I have one and Hippie has one. So why don't you take it away, Hippie?
Oh goodness, I'm first. Okay.
I'm unpredictable.
You're unpredictable. I could end up rambling, only because I played it this afternoon. I went on Twitter and said, "Hey, STOAdmiralAaron, the guy, he's been on the roundtable, and he's used social media like a madman to promote his missions." And I went ahead and played his first one. The mission is called Adrift. Gosh, I want to say his in-game handle is like Midnighttic. Not 100% sure on that. I'll have to look it up and give you the in-game handle for the show notes. The mission is first. I'll talk about the main thing that didn't work for me, but it worked in this case because I was playing Miranda Mayhem. But if I were playing a different character, it probably would not have worked so well. There's what we were talking about before, or rather what you were talking about before, Dragoon, where you said that Kestrel was talking about the difficulties of writing for player characters that you have no idea anything about.
Yeah.
And in this case, there are instances where my very stoic Boff suddenly breaks out in an exclamation and is like, and it all worked okay. You know, I understood that there were not going to be very early on. I understood that this is how the various characters were going to talk, and I mean sometimes the captain says things like with big exclamation points like "I need answers now," and I'm like, for Miranda Mayhem it all kind of worked. But were I playing a different captain, I would have liked to have had a little bit more choice, even if it's just the invisible choice of, you know, having 3 different ways to say I need answers, or having 2 different ways to say I need answers. But that was the thing that didn't work. And now I want to talk about a lot of things that really did work. first, this is, as far as I know, and I think from everything I read in the mission, AdmiralAaron's first, or rather Midnighttic.
It's Midnighttic.
Yeah, Midnighttic. This was his very first Foundry mission that he ever worked on, and for that, like you, Dragoon, I often look at someone's first Foundry mission a little bit differently. You know, I'm like, hey, did they do this? Did they do that? And in this case, all of those little things were done. All of those, every Borg drone that appeared in the mission had, it didn't have generic NPC names above it. They were all renamed drone and things, things of that nature. He did a really, really nice job on making the maps look really great. There's not a lot of weird trigger effects that happen on any of the maps or anything like that, but it was really, really beautiful everywhere. The maps that he chose to use as his base maps really worked in pretty much every situation. The characters are his strong point, is what I would say here. He's most strong in presenting you with the characters that he's created. This AdmiralAaron, his mirror universe counterpart, an admiral that you deal with, and he's very good at creating those characters and making you really, really connect with them. And for that earns, a lot of points with me. I love good character work, and this had that. Little spelling mistakes or typo mistakes, possibly, throughout the mission did not, for me, detract too much from what I was experiencing. It's a very ambitious story that he's done a lot of really cool stuff with. The ground portions, there are a good number of effects that are used really well, and on the ground maps he does use a couple of very simple triggers that are well done. They're well executed. It's a good mission. It's a really good, it's a good mission overall that I would say works for a certain kind of like gung-ho admiral. But if your character is not immediately like able to fall into, you might not enjoy that aspect of it. But other than that, it's a good story. It's an ambitious story that has some really interesting character work in it that I really enjoyed the hour and like 10 minutes that I spent playing the thing. That's my review of Adrift by STOAdmiralAaron.
And AdmiralAaron has just published the sequel, which is called Variants. Someone in the chat room mentioned that it had lots of spelling mistakes too, and I think take a moment to talk about that, because it's come up on the forums recently as well, and it is something that distracts from your mission when it is in there, and it's something that I find very hard to go and look at my own missions and try and edit them. So I really suggest getting somebody else to look at it. Find a friend to play your mission just for that purpose, and don't ask them to review anything else. Just say, just do that, because that doing a normal review or a detailed review and checking for spelling mistakes can be a very lengthy process, and you can have that by just have that time by just asking them to edit.
I agree.
And they can get you a good list, and that will catch a lot of it, and you have 2 people, you catch more. 3 people, you'll catch even more. And there's always people willing to do it for you. I mean, in this Starbase UGC chat room and in the Foundry Talk or even on Twitter. There's lots of us on Twitter.
No, I mean, right now I'm going through and basically trying to find all of my typos in part 2. But once I'm done with that...
when I played yours to beta test, I was not looking for typos.
Yeah, but I mean, even once I'm done finding all the typos, I'm going to start seeking out other people and have them go find typos, because there will be a ton that I missed or just don't even see.
Because, I work in the newspaper business, and I'm an editor, and what we like to say is that everybody has about a 5% mistake rate. And then, the original writer is going to make, however many words they write, they're going to have about a 5% of those are going to be a mistake of some sort. And, it doesn't, that's an average and a generalization. You might write one thing and it'll be perfect. The next time you write it, you actually have a 10% error rate, and it'll average out to 5. But the person editing your work will also have a 5% error rate. They're not going to catch 5% of your mistakes.
Right.
So there's nothing that's ever going to be error-free. And this happens in, professional life and in, the amateur stuff that we do in the Foundry. So, I don't hold people to impossibly high standards as far as that goes. But, there's ways to try and catch it. And I encourage people to do that. Especially, it should be said, especially people who write all their dialogue in the Foundry. Those of us who don't write them in some kind of outside thing first with a spell check on it.
Right.
But noting that even a word processor will miss stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Especially homonyms. Words that that sound the same but are not spelled right. Like, are not spelled the same, like there, and there. It's and it's, things like that. Spell check won't catch that.
Right.
And people write things in a lot of different ways. Rogue Enterprise says writing in word processors is for chumps.
I write in a notebook. So I write in a notebook and transcribe it into the Foundry. So
I write in Google Docs. Seems like a good way. All right, let's move on to my review, which is I also reviewed somebody's first mission. It's called Federation Spies by Mignard, or Mignard, it might be French, and the G is mostly silent. So this is a KDF mission. You receive a covert message through one of the bars on Kronos, and you're given very little information otherwise, which I thought was great, because when you're dealing with spies, they shouldn't just tell you everything right away. They should keep things from you. They should keep you in the dark. You should always be guessing if you're dealing with anything involving spies. That'll be a lesson for you, Hippie, since you're wanting to know about spy fiction. Yeah. The very first map you get to, I thought was really nice. It's a small thing and it's a subtle thing, but it's really nice because it's the back room of the bar, and he did a really good job of kitting the room out with objects and things to make it look like it should be that back room, and I felt like it was just a seamless transition almost into that first custom map. There was one strange thing, though, which is he used the TOS biobed, which might have several versions, but whatever, this one had like the heartbeat monitor above it, which, unless you attach it to a wall, it just looks like it's floating in place, and it was very strange. So let's see. He had a nice touch in his dialogue, especially in the dialogue buttons, of using Klingon phrases. Now, I was playing a Klingon, so that was fine. He also translated them in that button, which is great. But obviously, you would have issues if you were playing it on something that's not a Klingon, a Gorn or an Orion and things like that. I mean, we don't really know the level of assimilation into the culture of the Klingons that happened after they took over those two races, or the other races, Lethians, Nausicaans, that sort of thing.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
You said in each of those boxes he also provides the translation as another way to look at that, to say that the translation is what your unless they're all like really honorable dialogue, but like the translation is what your non-Klingon is saying.
Well, it wasn't every time, but you could look at it that way. I mean, he didn't do it in every button. Some of it was just, in plain English. So now he did use a lot of in the captain dialogue. He used a lot of things that sounded very Klingon, And at one point, he had a very odd thing that several times he referred to one of the bridge officers as youngster in the dialogue. And I would refrain from assuming any age when you're doing things like that. When you're addressing your bridge officers, you address them as, hey, you, instead of, hey, kid. Because you never know. I mean, the guy who might have used, the most aged face complexion that he could possibly use on that bridge officer. And he could be supposed to be really, really old, hundreds of years old, for all you know. So, it's that difficulty, again, of writing for people that you don't know who they are. Now, it was a fairly straightforward mission after that. You go and rescue you actually are working with the Federation, which is kind of nice, and it felt very good to be sort of covertly working with the Federation, because now we have this sort of a little bit more of a thawing climate with the new Accord. So you help one of their ships that's been attacked by Orion pirates, which in turn had been attacked by the Breen. This is all actually turns out to be a very convoluted Starfleet intelligence plot, but it was relatively well done, and it was very good for a first mission. There weren't any glaring errors, not a lot of floating objects, not a lot of unnamed things. In fact, all of his interact objects were named, which is great. You can see object 01 or something in the when you're going to interact with it. That's something that I always forget. And so I think we should be on the lookout for more missions from Mignard, because and he's active on the forums, so great addition to our little community here.
Woohoo!
And always good to have more KDF missions, story-based KDF missions, because obviously, and that's something we've been talking a lot about lately. There's a lower population of authors, lower population of players that like to do KDF missions, and we should encourage them anytime we can.
Yeah, it always kind of surprises me how consistently we see new authors coming in.
Oh yeah, I mean it's sort of like a turnover thing. I mean you get old authors who lose interest and go on to play other games, or just leave the community for whatever, and you get new authors to replace them. It's the same thing with general game population, but it's always great to see new people interested. So since we're talking about people's first missions, I want to put it out there again that I have put another thread on the forums. I want people to give me their missions that are below 5 reviews, missions that are either brand new and need to get out of review purgatory, or existing missions that have had trouble getting out of that. So let me know. Give me the faction and the name and the author name, in case it's different from your forum handle. And I will go play them. I will give them, obviously, the score in-game to help them get out of review purgatory, and there you have it. And I will review them on this show. Rogue Enterprise says review trades, but you don't actually have to review anything of mine. If you want to, that's fantastic, but you don't have to. And certainly there are several other forums for review trades. And I see I already have one in the chat room here. Roland Time says Rescue 102 only has 2 reviews. But obviously I will not be playing that, because it's much more funny to make fun of him for that just sitting there. So
I should point out, Dragoon, that I still have that graphic you had me make for for showing off new missions.
What was that?
I still have that.
Yeah. And we also want to promote new missions, so this is a good way to do that, actually. Probably even a better way than what we had been doing, or what we had wanted to do, which is just announce them. So we'll review them.
I assume if we actually start promoting missions, people will want to start giving us missions to promote then.
Well, we hope. But in any case, post in my thread on the official forums, and I will play your missions, because we need missions to review on the show. We want to do at least one every time. Occasionally we don't live up to that, but that's our goal. So let's move on to mission discussion topics. And Dragoon, you had a very good one, I thought.
I did, and then I forgot what it was.
Star Trek feel.
Oh, yes.
Basic memory.
Yeah, well, I've had a couple of ideas run through. Okay, but yeah, basically, it's one of those things that we talk about all the time. People talk about it even more, and usually in this very ambiguous sense. But I thought it would be kind of cool to, like, maybe look at a typical Star Trek episode and kind of start to break down exactly what is it about something that gives it that Trek feel. And I realize that this is an incredibly nebulous subject. And in fact, every person you talk to will have a different answer. But I mean, all the same, I'd still kind of like to get people talking about it. And if I remember correctly,
so what is a typical Star Trek episode, though?
Yeah. Okay, so for the sake of argument, let's pull like an episode of TNG. So some of the things that I kind of pull out of a typical like episode of TNG, and obviously the flavors change depending on which Trek you're going for. Voyager is going to be much more action oriented. DS9 is much more drama oriented. Enterprise is more Voyager, except with less shiny tech
and more knocking people on their asses.
Yeah, but I mean, just some of the things, because I mean, I was thinking about it, and for instance, the Next Generation, one of the keys was that there was always, I mean, they always had their arc, but there was a situation that they had to overcome, and there was a point of discovery, and there was oftentimes certain elements of like mystery in it, where they're trying to just figure out what's going on, what the nature of the problem is. And I realized at the time, I was kind of thinking about this, is that it has very much some similarities with like a mystery adventure, where it's almost best if it's kind of like written backwards, where you have the solution, but then you like work your way backwards to them trying to figure out the problem. Obviously, there's usually not a dead body involved, but just kind of some of those
sometimes.
Things.
Like that one where Riker is accused of murder starts off with the murder.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I just kind of found those similarities in that. And even like later episodes like Voyager, there's them being introduced to the problem, them trying to figure out different aspects of the problem or piece together what the problem is if they don't fully understand what's going on. And then there's the end part at the end with them dealing with the problem. And I mean, I kind of was thinking, I mean, isn't this some things that we can do more to like work into our Foundry missions? And kind of identifying some of those elements. I don't know, I feel like I'm doing all the talking here.
I'm thinking about what you're saying, and I think you're right. There are things that we can do to bring those kind of what would you call, like, I mean, aside from just calling it like the Trek element of it.
Well, I mean, what I'm referring to is kind of a variation on the dramatic arc.
Yeah.
In many ways, and it's its own kind of little flavor, and like I said, it has those kind of interesting similarities to like a mystery.
Well, for me, I mean, it's usually the little things. I mean, yes, there is an overarching mystery, and usually I would say so. There's some kind of science involved with it. Either the mystery itself is science based, or the way to solve it is science based.
So I think it's safe to say that exposition is a strong part of the Trek feel.
Oh yeah.
That there's an explanation, there's a scientific analysis of the situation.
There's always two people talking to each other about that.
Or the conference room scene. I mean, how much time did we spend in that conference room? Enterprise didn't have a conference room, but
if they were anything like the Stargate cast, they hated filming those scenes. I can tell you, because they just go on forever. the Stargate guys talk about that a lot.
I can imagine. I'm sure there's a reason they had a pot of coffee on the...
But yeah, I mean, you can do those scenes in the Foundry. I mean, yeah, and I think actually what you get down to is almost it's the personal interactions between the crew that help give it the Star Trek feel.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be something as similar as your bridge officers having a brief argument. It doesn't have to be, really heated. It's just, a discussion back and forth.
Yeah, like a healthy debate. Like they don't see things the same way. Not a I hate you and you are totally wrong kind of argument.
You rarely saw the crew of the Enterprise, throwing punches at each other.
Right.
But they had lively debates.
But I mean, even in that, I mean, the various crew members would take on roles. I mean, Worf was always the more tactical approach of our best method is a direct attack, or if some cases he would advise caution or look at it from a tactical situation that this was a threat. You had Beverly, that was often the moral side of things. This thing has just as much right to be as we do. We need to look at if what we're doing is really what is morally right, that sort of thing. Deanna also often took that role, although Deanna was often more trying to get at the intents and feelings behind the decision. You got Riker, who is kind of more of a Kirk, where he was a man of action. He wanted to have a more direct solution, and as soon as he found a solution that was he would push for that. Data, who is pure analysis. How Brent Spiner managed to put out all of that exposition without stuttering or what, I don't know, but
many takes, I imagine.
Yeah. And then obviously Geordi coming in with the more analysis. Well, if we plug the thing into the thing, we should be able to bypass the thing. And so...
And then you had, the captain at the middle of all this who would listen to everything and, always, the first... It's something I've done in my Foundry missions, where it's always the first thing Picard would do in a crisis. He would ask for suggestions, and then he would sort of sit in the middle and listen to all of it, and then make a decision.
But I think that's actually something that we as authors kind of sometimes fall into a trap of having all of our exposition come from one officer. It's like, oh, well, this is a science subject. We'll have the scientist explain it to the player. And a so much better way to kind of really drive back to that Trek feel is to not have the solution immediately obvious, but have the solution come out of a discussion with the various bridge officers. I mean, that's something that you can do to really bring the bridge officers to life without stepping on their potential different characters. Because, I mean...
Oh, absolutely.
Because, I mean, the scene we kind of just described really works no matter which crew from Star Trek you put into it.
Yeah, because there's always somebody filling those roles. And you have to assume that essentially on the player's bridge, there's their bridge officers filling those roles as well. And if you feel like maybe somebody's not going to have a role, then you invent a junior officer or somebody else on the ship to come in and be that voice.
I honestly think it might be strongest to try to invent officers that can fill those voices sometimes because of the problem of not knowing who their boss are.
Yeah, I always want to say that you got to be careful with that, just because I'm not opposed to inventing new officers, but if you try to get away from that too much, you kind of end up with what's been going on with the featured episodes, where you start cutting out the officers entirely, or risk that you're doing that. So even though they're there, you kind of shove them out of the way. And really, I mean, in the context of the character, the bridge officers are important to them. So including them in some meaningful way, which I realize this is really tricky, not knowing who they are, is still important. And even if you're bringing in new characters, the old bridge officer should still be involved in the conversation. I mean... Yeah. And like I said, I mean, knowing their profession, we can still kind of infer some overarching role to them.
See, I'm thinking you could do something like if instead of having their chief engineer be the one that has the interest or the point of view in dealing, whichever point of view you're assigning to that chief engineer. Have the mission call for an explosive specialist or a warp core engineer, and have their chief engineer call one of the junior officers. And that way, you're right, they're still involved in the conversation.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's a tough
there's
question.
a lot of different ways to do it, but I think it's that crew interaction that really makes it feel like something from one of the series. Because when you get down to it, I mean, what is a TV series except characters interacting with each other? And that's something that we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's funny. Something that was kind of brought up in that panel with Kestrel that I mentioned before is the idea of trying to imply story onto characters without defining. And it's almost kind of like with horror, where you never show the bad, you feel the influence, kind of a thing, where you don't really assign character to them, but you leave gaps for the character to be filled in by the player. And it's times like that I think you can really jump and have the player kind of like fill that role for you. I know, like I said, it's kind of those really tricky things, but I think if you can manage to pull it off, you can make some meaningful interactions even with characters you know nothing about.
And you can kind of strike that balance of doing that without necessarily assigning personality traits to them, or not going overboard with it.
But I mean, like I said, I tend to fall back on this person, I know he's an engineer. I mean, he's clearly going to have some, like, a strong emphasis. I mean, he obviously chose to be an engineer, assuming that the player hasn't invented some kind of weird indentured servitude thing. So that implies a couple of things about the character. I mean, that he's technical and that he's going to have good knowledge of ship, stuff like that. So thinking a bit along Taurus, a Geordie LaForge kind of a character. Maybe not quite as over the top as Trip, but you can get that role
Keep your shirt
to work
on, Lieutenant.
You can get that role to, or that variable of a character to work for a lot of different people and still kind of work in connections. It's just if you know where to make those connections onto the more known aspects of the character.
And the other thing too is to probably keep it consistent.
Yeah.
Throughout your episode. Yeah. Don't have, emotionless dialogue for a bridge officer throughout the entire thing, and then one huge outburst where they just go nuts. Keep an even tone. You might escalate it just slightly when you're in a tense situation or something like that, but these people are supposed to be highly trained. I mean, your bridge officers, they're Starfleet officers, or they're Klingon warriors, or Romulans. Obviously, they're trained enough for you to have them on your bridge, so obviously they're not going to go completely catatonic on you in a firefight.
I would argue with Romulans, you almost have a little bit more freedom because Cryptic designed the race to be a little more focused, because the bulk of your crew members are going to be Romulan or Reman, and they're going to have that little more emotional side. So you actually, I would say you have a little more freedom with the Romulan missions than you do with the Feder Klingon. Because, I mean, Klingons are really tough because there's the strong desire to make them the stereotypical Klingon. But obviously there's a lot of other races in the KDF.
Yeah, it's like your stereotypical Klingon is so different from your stereotypical Nausicaan pirate or a Lethian mercenary. They're all very different approaches.
Yeah.
That's when, I mean, we have the tool to, kind of tailor things to the captain a little bit, because you can make multiple dialogue options for that. We can't do that with boffs. So that's when if you really want, somebody on your crew who's very Klingon, invent a character for that. Then you can make them very Klingon, or you can make them be very Orion or whichever race you want to be, and you can even do that with Feds, of course, as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you want somebody to act like a Tellarite, don't assume that they have a Tellarite on their crew. Invent one.
So, I mean, what other ways do people kind of see or elements of Star Trek episodes that can translate well into the Foundry?
It depends on what kind of a writer that someone is. As I said, earlier, for me, a big part of Star Trek has always been its ability to comment on the human condition. And people who can find a way to make a story do that, bravo. I'd love to see more of it. So,
yeah, I mean, definitely there are times when, in watching certain episodes of Star Trek where they don't tell you what the right answer is, and in fact, the really good Star Trek episodes, you should not have a strong feeling or not have a confidence about what the right choice was.
Right.
And
I agree.
There's a number of TNG episodes where it's like, yes, we did what was necessary, but what we did right, or did the consequences of our decisions outweigh the benefits of the choice we make? So it's not about trying to tell people what was right and wrong. It's about getting them to question what was the correct answer, or if there was a correct answer.
Yeah, I think the ones that always, would hit me were the ones where you're absolutely right, where you couldn't be sure of what the right answer was because they did such a good job of presenting both sides, and often you would even see the crew not knowing whether they had just made the right decision. I think you're right about that.
There was an episode not too long ago I watched a TNG called The Masterpiece Society, and it's the one where you've got the genetically engineered society that's basically going to be ripped apart by this core fragment. And they've been in complete isolation since, probably they're human, but they've been in complete isolation, and there's basically this perfectly manicured eugenics. And from the beginning, I mean, they make contact, and normally, at first, they don't even want to talk to the Enterprise, but they realize the situation is pretty dire, and they have no means of dealing with it. So they need the Enterprise if they ever want to survive. So they agree to make contact, but and even early on, there's a lot of the crew that are not so happy about the idea of this eugenics society. In fact, Geordi LaForge, who is blind from birth, is like snarky through a lot of the episode. And so they save the colony, but through the course of it, they make certain people in the society realize that the world is bigger than their little colony, and that humanity has managed to eclipse them technologically, despite the fact that there is no new eugenics. The downside to this, of course, is that these people want to leave, but it screws up the rest of the eugenics because everyone was basically bred for a specific purpose. And so it's basically, as a result of their departure, the entire colony is at risk of falling apart. And at the end of the episode, Picard is questioning whether even in saving the colony, whether they still destroyed it, and whether they had the right to do that. And it's one of those things that, I mean, it's not even about whether eugenics is right or wrong. That's not the question. The question is did the Enterprise have the right to interfere and to impose their belief systems on this colony? And it's like one of those things. I mean, it's like, is there a right answer? I don't know. So yeah, I mean,
yeah, no, I think that's a great thing. It's something that that I have tried to do in one of my missions, and even tried to do. I think we tried to do a little bit of that with Purity, is have a lot of moral ambiguity. Is like, at the very end of it, it's like, with all these threats, that we know are out there, like the Undine and things like that, did we do the right thing by, getting rid of all these guys that were supposedly trying to make us stronger? There's a little bit of ambiguity there. I mean, I think probably most people will say, yeah, these guys are jackasses, we got to get rid of them. But there's a little bit of ambiguity, and that's always good to have.
But I mean, and I bet you in a lot of ways that's kind of one of those elements that's often missing from, and if Cryptic will forgive, from some of their missions, is that, because the natural state for a writer is to have everything wrapped up nicely at the end, and maybe sometimes, some of that Star Trek element is that, yeah, from a physical standpoint, leaving you with questions.
Yeah.
And I am someone who likes to be left with questions. Like, I don't know about anybody else, but I liked the movie Prometheus because it left me with lots of questions. And I didn't like it as much as like the old Alien, the original Alien, or anything like that, but I did like it. And I did like that it left me with many questions.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pull up the much-lined mission Divided Impera. And while so many people...
words, boy.
So many people didn't like that mission, I will admit that mission got people talking.
Oh yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And don't necessarily shy away from doing something controversial, like I think some of the things that Rogue did in his Orders series.
Yeah, don't shy away from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that was totally what Christine was going for, because I know she was intending to write a follow-up and wrap-up for that. But, yeah, I don't think any other mission has gotten as much discussion as that mission. And in the end, I think it may have inadvertently succeeded where a lot of us, because nobody's forgotten that mission.
No, definitely not. So yeah, you want to aim to that, something that'll get people talking.
Yeah, it's a very
that's
tricky
when
thing.
You've succeeded.
Because I wouldn't want to make a mission that devalues the player, which is kind of why people don't like Divided Impera. But at the same time, there should be a chance where the player isn't so sure of the right answer or of the moral high ground. I don't know, is there anything else? About.
Well, I think the bottom line for me is that the people keep going on and on the forums about the Star Trek feel and how this game doesn't have enough Star Trek in it or things like that. And so I look at I've seen every episode of Star Trek besides the animated series. I've seen all the movies, and the Star Trek is so huge and covers so many different types of storytelling that almost anything can be Star Trek. And that's what I always say. It's like, Star Trek is everything. And yes, this game shies more towards the action-oriented shows, of which there were many, many, many across the show's history. Across all of the shows, going back all the way to TOS. TOS is great, action, adventure romp. And so, I've heard people say, it's not Star Trek if it doesn't have exploration. Well, lots of Star Trek didn't have exploration. Episode to episode. Most of the movies didn't have exploration. A lot of the movies had, you were going places where people had already been, or, you were on Earth a lot. You were, anything but exploration in a lot of that. So, and it's a funny thing. It's not unique to Star Trek and Star Trek Online. You wouldn't believe how many people on the Old Republic forums keep saying, add more Star Wars stuff to it, and make it more like Star Wars. It's not enough like Star Wars. And so my favorite one is somebody chimed up, is like, okay, so we'll make all of the blasters into one-shot weapons, one-shot kills, no matter what armor you have on, because obviously the stormtroopers all got one-shot killed. And we'll make lightsabers uber powerful and deflect anything. So yeah, good luck PvPing with that. So you can go overboard on making things too much like the source material because some of it just doesn't work in games.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's my.
But I mean, Dead Space 9 definitely had plenty of action.
Mm-hmm. That's the one I usually am the most like because I like those storylines. I don't make a lot of exploration missions. In fact, I'm struggling making the one that I am trying to do. And I make DS9 style episodes where they're very political or things like that. So
yeah, it's funny. You mentioned there's no exploration in the movies. It's like, well, sure, there was exploration in the motion picture, and it nearly tanked the movie franchise.
Well, it's there is some. I didn't say there's. I shouldn't say there's none, because there is some, and obviously like in Star Trek V, they explore towards the center of the galaxy to find an unknown planet, but nobody likes Star Trek V.
All right. Star Trek V, the plot was we're going to go find God. Oh, wait, it's not God. It's some crazy alien, so let's just leave. Mm. That's the movie. That's why I hate it.
If you want to find out what it really is, play My Mission Cold Winds. Shameless self-promotion.
I hate that you made Star Trek V.
I made it better.
Better, some.
me and Cryptic, because, of course, they made Nimbus 3 so awesome.
Yeah, that is true. Nimbus 3 is my favorite place in the game.
I think I got a good finisher for this discussion, and it brings it back to what actually originally started this discussion. I had commented it on Twitter that Star Trek Borg, I felt, while isn't the epitome of acting in any sense, although John DeLance does a very good job in that.
We should say that Star Trek Borg, if you're not familiar with it, was a live-action video game from back in the 90s.
But one of the things I commented about that is I really liked it because it had a good Star Trek feel to it. And so I want to wrap up this discussion about...
It had no exploration in it.
Yeah.
Just saying, go on.
Well, a funny thing is that another game that I thought had a really good Star Trek feel to it was Elite Force. And that thing is all about battle and combat and action. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So...
And no exploration.
What about those games... What about those games made it? What about those games captured the Star Trek feel? If anyone can even answer that question,
I think it was character interaction. It was it was the look of everything. It was the design of the sets, and I don't know. It was a lot of different things, and there was lots of good writing going on as well in those old games. The story of Elite Force was very cool.
Yeah.
It was one of those. It was a mystery to be solved through violence.
So for me, one of the video games, the video game that had one of the strongest Star Trek feels to me was I don't remember the name of the ship, but I remember the captain was Marcus Raffelian, and the game was Away Team, and it was in like the third-person Baldur's Gate style. And what you talked about before, Dragoon, is the thing that made it feel like Star Trek to me, which was the crew had interactions with each other, and depending on which different crew you had with you on different away teams, they would interact differently, and that made it feel like Star Trek.
I think it seems like character interaction is one of the defining aspects of what makes a good Star Trek game good. Like I remember Starfleet Academy. I mean, you had all kinds of great characters in that, including some of the original series cast.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you think that the nature of us having to playing unknown captains with unknown bridge officers kind of hampers this in a way?
It does.
Slightly. Yeah.
It does. There's no denying it.
But there's ways around it.
Yeah, I'll say quite honestly, that's why I created the Mayhems. It's because I can actually toy around with them.
Yeah.
And you can interact with them as your character, and your bridge officers are still there because they always are when you beam over on an away team. But I've given given myself someone else to write that I don't have to try to be somewhat generic with.
I don't know. I mean, I always kind of feel that there's like a golden formula. I shouldn't say formula, but there's a golden method to really making characters who are unknowns work. And it's like such a nuanced thing, and it has to be done on such a subtle level. But I grew up, I mean, in the late 80s and 90s, and during that time, I mean, I had a Super Nintendo, and there was like a bajillion like RPGs and action movies on the Super Nintendo, and quite a few
even
of them,
some Star Trek ones.
even some Star Trek ones, although not that many great ones on the Super Nintendo.
Not that I recall.
But in quite a few of, like, especially like the RPGs and whatnot, they often had silent protagonist main characters, or characters that did not bring their own character to the story. You were expected as the player to kind of fill that character. And I'm just kind of thinking, I mean, it seems to me that, because I mean, take a Link from Legend of Zelda. I mean, huge franchise, I mean, incredibly popular. Link has no character of his own. Everything about his character is derived from other people reacting to him and what the player brings to it. So, I mean, I want to say that there's a way to kind of do that same thing where we allow the players to bring their character in, and we just kind of play around with that.
That's where I think giving them options, dialogue options, certainly helps, because it allows them to maybe tailor some responses to what they think their character should be.
Yeah,
You can't give them every possible, every possible permutation of what they might say, but you can give them some options that at least a really over the top gung ho option, a neutral option, and a timid option. Things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess with bridge officers it's even harder because we control the dialogue. But I mean, still, I mean, just kind of looking at what we do know about the characters and trying to build off of that, versus trying to assign a character to them, and then hopefully getting the kind of enticing the player to fill in their own emotions. Because I mean, imagine you can write things in such a way that they're not particularly emotion laden, but can be filled in with emotion. Am I making any sense?
I'm trying to picture in my head what something like that would be like.
Yeah, I mean...
Of course, I was muted. Yeah, I was doing the same thing as Dragoon. I'm like, how exactly would that work?
But I mean, things like a bridge officer showing concern for another, in such a way that it's not...
happened to be a Vulcan.
Even a Vulcan we could show concern. I mean,
True.
Someone is injured is like, are you all right?
Are you damaged?
I think most Vulcans wouldn't say, "Are you damaged?" They would, "Are you all right?" Is something that even fits into it. But I mean,
they don't quite go to 7 of 9 extremes.
Hey, that Borg that I rescued from Kittimer, he would be like, "Are you damaged?"
I just see him running around whining. It's too quiet in here.
And here's another thing that I've been toying with. I'm making this exploration mission, and one of the I've spoken about this before a little bit, but one of the great things about most of the TNG episodes, for sure, and lots of Voyager episodes and other ones, is they had an overarching storyline that affected the entire ship. Basically, is the mission they were on, and then they had a B storyline of something going on with one of the crew members or several of the crew members. And these were intertwined and often related to each other. And sometimes it was flipped, and the personal storyline was the big thing of the episode, and the other one was incidental. So I'm doing one of these, and I want to have one of your bridge officers have history with the junior officer that I'm bringing on board for this mission. And how I'm going to do it is I'm going to try to be a bit vague about it. say, oh, have her recognize this bridge officer. Oh, sorry, sir, I didn't realize you were on board. And the officer says, that's fine, Lieutenant, what was your report? And is very sort of, stiff about it. And then you ask him later, is there something I should know about? And he said, we were at the academy together. It got complicated. I'd rather not say, but it won't affect our performance, sir. Because that's something they did on the show all the time, is that, they bring in somebody that had history with one of the bridge officers, like Riker's father and things like that. But, what if somebody has their Jem'Hadar officer in that slot?
Oh, see.
That's the difficulty. So what I'm toying with is maybe asking the person to say, okay, slot one of the regular Starfleet Federation races in that thing before you start this mission.
I bet you
so
could
will
do
make
it.
more sense.
I bet you
Or
could
trigger it.
I bet you could be even more clever about it, and I bet you could actually get the player to reveal that to you without just directly asking. See, so maybe you could give like the player an option of I understand you did well at the academy, or is like, and then the other option is it's a pity you never served at the academy, or never went through the academy. And
you could ask a few leading questions or things like that.
Yeah.
And then you can, if you do it on the same map, you can trigger it so that if they never went to the academy, you might not you present a different dialogue.
That could be good, because where this takes place is on an interior map, which is the one that I decided to stop building because of the invisibility bug. And it's going to be like a science lab, and you walk down the hallway and get to the science lab, so you could have a conversation with your bridge officer before you get there that maybe susses out some of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and then in the second map, it doesn't go into any particular detail, so that people don't actually know.
No, it's not.
It's not going
to be a big thread that's throughout the thing, and it would have a little interaction at the end. Yeah. So that's a possibility.
Yeah. But I mean, that's exactly kind of what I'm talking about, though, is that the idea of trying to build hooks that are not writing on the character, but opening space for the player to fill in their own backstory.
Yeah.
But I think having these personal interactions is very big, because it was a very big part of Star Trek. I mean, especially bringing in characters that had history. I mean, right from the beginning of TNG, you had Riker and Troy who had this history. And that was great dynamic between the two of them, and was throughout the entire series. And, all kinds of stuff like that. And the dynamic between Picard and Crusher, because Picard, got her husband killed, essentially. And things like that, and it's tough to bring that into Foundry missions, but it can be done. Have that moment of, really, how do you know this person? Oh, I know them a little bit. He's my father.
But I mean,
fun stuff like that.
Definitely keeping it vague like that opens up the opportunity for the
And
the player.
It's actually not the academy. It's see, we served together on the such and such ship. It got complicated, and that's all I'm going to say about it.
What if you were even to keep it vaguer and just say his last assignment?
Could do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a few niche cases that might run afoul of it, but I mean, just kind of like dancing around it and just allowing the player to
intentional vagueness, and let them fill in the blanks of, ooh, maybe this was an illicit romance, or who knows what, or maybe they got my best friend killed, or things like that. So let the player's imagination do the work for you, because they'll come up with something more fun than you'll ever do. So it looks like we're getting towards the end of our time here. So why don't you throw up our contact info? Sorry, Mark couldn't join us, but he must still be having technical difficulties.
Yeah. All right. If anyone wants to email us, and I'm not entirely sure, Dragoon, does anyone ever actually email us?
Very occasionally.
Oh.
I'll check.
While he's doing that, you can email us at foundryroundtable@live.com. we can also be reached on Twitter at Foundry Roundtable. I can keep an eye on that one, so it's a little more consistent. Dragoon can be reached at Dragoon1701. HippieJohn here can be reached at Hippie_JOHN. And Mark can be reached at Markhawkman, although he doesn't use it very often. And I can be reached at Greendragoon, where I'm sure I talk way too much.
We do spend a lot of time on Twitter.
Yeah, a lot of good discussions.
It's funny because I never thought that I would ever do Twitter ever in a million years, but I'm just completely addicted to it now. I have 13.3 thousand tweets.
I don't have nearly that many, and I'm thankful.
So what was today's discussion? Movies that need to be made into TV shows?
Yes. It's a good one. Discuss amongst yourselves, but for now we will say goodnight.
Oh, before we go, I would like to throw it out to the community. We would love to hear your thoughts on what a Trek can be translated into the Foundry. And what kind of, welcome to kind of talk about what about Star Trek speaks to you.
Makes it Star Trek.
Yeah, what makes it Star Trek?
What makes something Star Trek to you? We want to know. But for the moment, we will sign off. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Hailing frequencies, glub glub.